Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Jay, please confirm.
I can hear you very clearly.
Great, thank you. So I hope you're all well. Today I'll be talking to you about stress in the workplace, and I'll keep it very simple. I will not be sharing any PowerPoints, but I will share the notes after the session is over. If you have questions, kindly write them either in the chat, and then I can try my best and answer them towards the end of the session. So, what is stress on a general level? Because stress is not just in the workplace. So, a very simple definition of stress, it is basically a feeling that we experience, and that feeling is perceived as stress because the demands that you get are. Let me try and simplify this a little bit. So, stress is a condition or a feeling experienced when a person perceives the demands within their front exceed the personal and social resources that is within their availability. A simpler way is anything that poses a challenge or a threat to our well-being. So before you even experience before you even experience stress, you experience something called pressure. So pressure is actually a good thing only if it stimulates and motivates one to do the right thing. However, too much pressure, of course, now then leads to stress because it's gotten to the extreme where maybe you're not able to handle things or control things as they should be. So, as we do our jobs, it's also important to note that any job worth doing is likely to involve a certain amount of pressure, especially when there's a sense of urgency, say, to meet deadlines and to produce good results. Prolonged pressure, on the other hand, leads to stress, and chronic stress can, of course, lead to destructive cycle of things like poor performance, decreased productivity, inefficiency, and of course, a declining level of your confidence. So, what are the type of stresses that we have? There are three major stresses that we have. One is acute, the other one is episodic, and the other one is chronic. So let me start with acute stress. So acute stress is actually what is the most common to all of us, and it comes from the demands and pressures of either things that have happened in the past and things that we are going to anticipate that will come. So in the middle of thinking, how did I handle this matter in the past and how will I handle it now based on the things that have changed, you can actually find yourself under quite a bit of pressure. Now, an example of acute stress is emotional distress, muscular pain, stomach and gut, as well as bowel problems. Then when it comes to episodic stress, this is the stress that affects those who suffer acute stress. So ideally, it's an advanced form of acute stress. And we tend to, the people who suffer that, usually you'll find they're always in a rush to do something, like they never quite pause to breathe and think through what they need to do. So they are always in a rush, they have too much, or they are taking on too much, but as well, they are not able to organize themselves in order to be able to deal with the pressures that are coming their way. The example of this would be, for example, someone who is overstimulated, like they want to do all those things at the same time, and yet they can only do one thing. And in the process, now they just get stressed out and then crash. Another example of episodic stress is headaches and migraines, as well as chest pains. And then this will come and then they'll go dependent on the level of the stress. Lastly is the chronic stress. This one, of course, is a combination of the acute and the episodic stress. And what happens is that this kind of stress usually will wear out those who are already stressed down. So it will grind at them, and the chronic stress is usually the one that actually leads to burnout. And then one of the other things that happens is they feel they're stressed out every day, every month, every year, and they often feel trapped. Like an example would be somebody who feels trapped in a career that they despise, someone who feels trapped in a marriage that they no longer want to be in. Those would be examples of chronic stress. So let's now focus on the workplace, stress in the workplace. So When an employee knows what to do and things are working out right, there is rarely any level of stress. However, the moment there is demand, and especially say, for example, either towards the end of the month or towards the beginning of the month, depending on which department that you are in. For example, if you're in an accounting department, you will be expected to run reports for the end of the month. You will be expected maybe to run after vendors and service providers who either owe and things like that. So the stress levels will be different. So stress can turn out to be, of course, a positive or negative thing. And this is, of course, based on your perception. So sometimes you can find that there are two people who have, quote unquote, almost the same amount of stress, but how they handle it is different. Why? Because of the perception, but also not just perception, there's also the level of resilience. There are those of us who are stronger than others in terms of maybe the experiences that we have been through. So when certain things come our way, we are able to handle better. So what are the causes of stress in the workplace? These are very many, but we will go through them. So there is a common ones, and then there's a not so common ones. So one of the major ones is the work environment. For example, the physical surroundings, the office layout, the lighting. What do we mean by physical surrounding? You could actually be working in a very nice building, but that building is right next to traffic. So there's next to traffic or a major road. So there's so much noise that you can barely focus. And perhaps you're the only person who is feeling very disturbed about it. Maybe other people got used, there are just very few of you, and maybe you cannot justify to the organization why they need to move the office location, because obviously they had thought out a few things here and there to say, this is going to be our present location. Now, the office layout could also be an issue. If you're working in an organization where everything is open plan, everybody has a telephone extension. So what happens? Everybody is talking on the phone. Sometimes others are talking on top of others. So you can barely, sometimes you can barely focus. And you see, there are those of us who speak at a louder volume than others. So sometimes you find that it gets difficult for you to do what we call high focus work or deep work, because the person seated next to you is, making a lot of noise and you're not able to focus. Another thing also about office layout, you might actually find you're also very cramped. The air conditioning is poorly done, or there's actually no air conditioning. And for that reason, you find that you're actually struggling to enjoy a breath of fresh air. So sometimes the office is very stuffy. And so eventually that creates some form of stress. Then there's the lighting. If the lighting is not sufficient, for example, if, God forbid, you end up working in an office where there are no windows, all you have to survive on is lighting, all through, the artificial lighting rather than the natural lighting. That can also take a toll. Then there's the job itself. Either you're doing too much work and you can't handle. And the thing is, no matter how good you are at your job, if the work is too much, it becomes difficult for you to deliver well. Again, if the work is too little, it means you have very little engagement. So you find you either start to feel very demoralized, or you feel like there's no value for you in the workplace, but you probably keep coming to work because, hey, you need to pay your bills. And then there's badly designed shifts and rotas. So there are organizations depending. And this happens a lot like in factory settings, where factory settings, again, also hospital settings, depending on where you are, and duty rotas and rosters have to be set. So you find that maybe the person who set the duty roster did it in a way that works to your disadvantage. But now, because again, you need to work and you need to put food on the table, you make do, but eventually it becomes a source of stress for you. Then there's a violation of laws with little reprieve. What does that mean? So there's every organization, I believe, has what we call policies, rules, and regulations, or even an employee handbook that actually guides you as an employee what to do. But you find that either because somebody is in a position of power, they choose to abuse their authority and they keep violating certain rules and regulations. And for you as an employee, when you try to report it, because that person has so much power and everybody believes that there's nothing wrong they can do, it becomes very difficult for you to do your job. Another is the a manager's inability to actually recognize stress. Why did I say a manager? Many times over, we report to a manager or a supervisor. And what that means is this person can be your make or break on many levels. If you have a manager who is supportive, even when you're doing a very difficult or complex job, it becomes much easier to get around your work. But if you have a manager who does not even understand what people management skills are, it actually adds to the already complex, the complexity of your job, the stress, the pressure. And then there's also the part of their inability to actually identify that maybe the way they are conducting themselves or the way they are managing people is causing a lot of stress. And so they also do not have maybe the capacity or the competence to be able to say, how best can I do this, or how can we do this differently so that we can work together as a team and achieve the organization goals. Then there's, of course, the major business adjustment. This one has been big over the last 4 years. And what do we mean by that? We're talking about mergers, acquisitions, restructuring. Obviously, mergers, acquisitions, restructuring will mean either somebody will lose their job, there may be some form of demotion. It's different things for different organizations, but they are not far-fetched from each other. And then there's, of course, the bankruptcy part of things, the organization you have been working, enjoyed working for, and then suddenly, because of COVID or different things, now the business has to close down and you probably won't even get your paycheck home or your service pay. And of course, there's a retirement. And people sometimes get retired early because maybe you're very close to the retirement age, but when the organization looks for different reasons, decides, you have 2 years, let's just pay you the 2 years remaining, and then you can proceed for different reasons that the organization says it has the discretion to make those decisions. And then there's what we call the poor productivity practices. This is a very big one. We often blame the organization sometimes for our stress, but actually as employees, many of us have the challenge of not exercising good productivity. What do I mean by good productivity? You need to be organized. How do you manage your time? When you come to the office in the morning, what are you doing? Are you looking at are you looking at your phone, looking at the TikTok, the Facebook, the Instagram? What's the latest? Or do you get to the office and say, I need to plan my day so that I understand what I need to do? So when you have poor practice, poor productivity practices, you're obviously going to get stressed. How will that happen? If you don't plan, for example, when you get in, as I said, you don't plan the activities that you need to do. You assume that maybe when your supervisor tells you, I need this and this done, you assume that you're going to remember everything. We have brilliant brains as human beings, but I can tell you, you cannot remember everything. So it is important to work with a notebook, or whether maybe you have that note application on your phone. Write down the things that you need to do. Otherwise, you'll find that every time your boss is asking you for something, you find that you forgot it. You're asking the boss, you actually told me to do this, because you forgot. Now you get very stressed, or you remember at the last minute. And then you have all these 5 projects on the table that require your attention, and they're all last minute projects. Then there's the lack of competence. If you don't have the skill to do something, often what will happen, there are 2 things that can happen. You can exercise the willpower and intention to say, since I don't know how to do this, I am going to reach out to a colleague who can help me, or I'm going to consult Google and YouTube universities to help me polish up this skill so that I am strong, informed, empowered enough to take on these tasks. But there's also another group of people who say, well, I don't know how to do this job, so I'm just going to leave this job. Perhaps someday somebody else will take over that assignment and do it. But you see, by the time you're being given that assignment, many times over, your boss assumes that you already know what you're supposed to do. Many of us are afraid to actually approach our bosses and say, I'm not sure how to do this. Could you please walk me through this? So that creates stress, because now you keep being asked for this assignment and you say, I'm working on it, and yet you're probably not working on it. Then there's a change of culture. Change of culture can also happen around, say, mergers, acquisitions, because now you have a new management. So they have a new style of working, a new style of delivery. Maybe the way you've been delivering on your work, now there are new expectations. Obviously, as human beings, we are very gifted in the art of resisting change. So you find that because now you're being told to do something in a different way, you start to possibly argue out and say, no, we've been doing it this way and this used to work. So eventually, either now you find yourself in a place where you have a job insecurity because this boss is telling you, I need it done this way, and you're arguing out and say, I need it, I'm going to do it in mode B. And the boss says this. So eventually now the boss starts to see you're someone that maybe you cannot work together, and they start to seek out a plan B or a way to manage you out. Then change in living conditions can also come back and affect you in the office. You see, we normally say charity begins at home, but we also say that the family is a basic unit of the society. So if things are not working out at home, they will obviously extend into the office. So you need to be alert on that. But yes, that can also be quite it can be quite a big stressor. And change in living conditions could also mean maybe you're building a new home. Building a home is actually quite expensive. It's a tedious process. It's a whole lot of things. So that can take a toll. It could be remodeling. It could be the house has deteriorated. Remember, I think this was last year, May, when it poured so heavily and a lot of people incurred losses. So this was something you hadn't planned for, but because it is your place of shelter, you have to figure out something to do. And then there's a part where your spouse is transferred to maybe a different town or to a place that is not workable. So as the two of you have to either now start trying to figure out how do we put together a routine that works. And maybe that transfer actually ends up incurring many more costs. Then there's a career development part of things. Uncertainties, stagnation, insecurity, low social value for work. So those are things, because if you're doing a job and maybe so promotions come and 5 years later you're still on the same job, you're still on the same position, nothing has moved. The only thing maybe you end up enjoying is a slight salary increment, maybe with regard to the inflationary rate or something of the sort. Again, unfulfilled ambitions and visions that lead to changing line of work and profession, because you've been doing this job, you are hoping maybe it will earn you this kind of money, it will earn you this position. 5 years from now, or from the time you had started the job, you had actually planned you're going to be a manager, director, or a CEO, but somehow these things didn't work out. And now you start to think, well, I now need to change things. And you see, when you're changing things, as I said, we are quite resistant to change. So that can also be a great stressor. Again, workload, job insecurity, problem jobs. Problem jobs are, you have to do the job. You can see the challenges are there. You shared the challenges with your manager and maybe top management, but because they're not, let me use the word that we say, they're not, situation or ground. They're not on the ground to see what's really happening. They possibly do not understand the level of challenges you're going through. So it's a problematic job. So every day you come to it and you're like, okay, these problems again and again. And then, of course, there's also problematic people. Now, problematic people is colleagues who just make everything difficult. They want to be the last man standing. They want to be the last ones arguing, so that when they're the last man standing, they win, even when things are not the right way. Okay? Now, what happens? So we've talked about the causes of stress. And then now, let's talk about the symptoms of stress. Okay, so we have the physical symptoms, which of course would be the headaches, insomnia, indigestion, high blood pressure, backaches, muscle aches. All those things, interestingly, are caused by stress in one way or the other. Now, when you have problems sleeping, you have problems focusing. If you do not get sufficient sleep, eventually you will be running on fumes because you don't have sufficient energy to give your best. Then there's a behavioral symptoms of stress, which is poor work performance. And this can end up being very continuous. I'm sure maybe in your workplaces, you found someone who was very good at what they were doing, but now they're not delivering. It's disciplinaries in and out. Their performance is not good. When everybody else got a bonus, they didn't get a bonus. So those behavioral symptoms. Then frequent accidents, poor relationships that keep leading to conflict. Then there's dependence on anti-relaxants such as caffeine, drugs, alcohol. and then a sense of feeling powerlessness. And then there's also the emotional factors, which include irritability, the lack of concentration, anxiety, and depression. So, what are the overall effects of stress when not handled? Of course, disability and accidents. And unfortunately, some of these accidents could end up being fatal, leading to death. Then there's workers' compensation claims, because remember, there are accidents. Every organization is required to have their workman's compensation insurance cover. So when an employee gets injured at work, investigations will be done. There'll be a lot of lost time. There will also be payments, either hospital bills. There'll also be what we call the payment of lost time. That employee who got injured, they were not able to work and they needed to continue earning either to feed their families. So all those things are factored in. Eventually, it becomes a loss to the company. Then there's absenteeism, and then presenteeism. So presenteeism is the opposite of absenteeism. So absenteeism, oh, you're sick, you'll even come up with all sorts of excuses. I remember at some point a few years ago, there's an organization I worked, and this employee used to have a grandmother who died almost every 2 weeks. So at some point we had to ask him, how many grandmothers do you have? Because there's always a grandmother dying. And obviously, he was trying to evade going to work, because eventually we discovered that I think the relationship with the supervisor was a bit off. And then, so presenteeism is where the employee comes to work, but they don't actually work. They just sit at their desk and look very, very busy, but they're actually not doing anything. And then, less productivity. Obviously, if an employee is not at their best, you will not expect the best results from them. If anything, there will be so many errors, and you will have to probably either assign someone to either redo that work or keep asking the employee to redo the work. And then again, low financial returns. So here's an interesting twist to stress. I want to talk about common mistakes that employees make that often lead to stress. This is very, very important, because I think a lot of us might find ourselves in this bracket at one time or the other. One is setting unrealistic goals, where you think you can do everything and everything. None of us is superhuman. We are all human. It's just that we probably work. Our levels of perseverance are different. But at the end of the day, you need to set goals that you can actually achieve. So don't go saying, I can do work A, B, and C, while you can't even finish your portion of work. And then poor communication. Communication is what drives relationships. It is what drives businesses. Many of the good deals that have been signed at table started with a handshake. We talk, we get to understand each other. Now, and from that communication, we build trust. So if there's poor communication, what happens is there's lack of trust, there's misunderstanding, there are all those things. So that's something that you need to be very keen on. Dictatorial aggressive behavior. As an employee, maybe because you feel that it is your right, the manager said something, either you took it out of context, or your colleague, you become very aggressive about it. And sometimes you even find your colleague is very confused. Why? What is going on? What did I say? Something like that. And then wanting validation. So this is the case scenario where you want to please everybody. You want to be liked by everybody. So when somebody asks you, can you do this job? Yes, I can do it. Can you do this job? Yes, I can do it. Eventually, because you didn't say no and you didn't set any boundaries, you end up getting very stressed, and people do not understand. People do not understand why you are not, why you are not, say, for example, able to deliver on something, and yet you said you can do it. Then there's, of course, unmotivated, not motivating staff. For example, if you are in a place of a position of authority or power, supervisory management position, don't just assume that your work is checking people, like when you were in school. If I remember correctly, the deputy principal, the deputy head teacher was the disciplinarian of the school. So anytime we saw the deputy, we used to run for our lives, because even when you haven't done something wrong, you would think that you've done something wrong and you're going to get punished. Don't treat employees like that in the workplace. Remember, employees are adults. I like to think of it this way. By the time an employee comes to an organization, you actually have a national ID. You have to have a certain age for you to achieve that. So treat that person like an adult and extend grace to them in order to be able to help them do their work. Criticism and negative discipline, which is basically what I just mentioned earlier. Creating a them and us culture. You know how organizations, people are creating a clique. You look like you come from this side of things, so we can be together. And you people, you look like you come from this side. Or sometimes it's a job grading thing. Because we are from this job grade, we hang out together. Because you people are from the lower job grade, you people hang out together. And sometimes it's an unspoken thing, but you can actually see it. Then poor conflict management. When you don't handle conflict well, conflict needs to be handled immediately in a timely way so that the next time that conflict happens, people are not building up on the anger which they had gotten from the first conflict. Resistance to change, not leading by example. You tell people do this, it's like what we say, you preach water, but you're drinking wine, and then incompetence, poor and low salary, unrealistic deadlines and expectations, prejudice, prejudice, race and status, overlooking the wisdom of other employees. There are employees who have stayed in an organization over a long period of time. Sometimes I look at those people as an extension of wisdom because they have probably seen many regimes of leadership come. They have seen when the organization started and where the organization is at. I had a colleague who had worked with the same organization for 38 years. And for me, he was a very good source of wisdom because he helped me see things from a different perspective. Then, of course, the lack of empathy. Empathy is like fitting into another person's shoe. You do not, and somebody's going through something and you don't extend them that grace. So, on the last part, how do we manage stress in the workplace? And as I said, I wanted to keep this very, very simple so that it's easy to practice this even after this conversation. Number one, learn to distinguish essential tasks to reduce distractions that cause overwhelm. What does that mean? You have to look at the tasks that bring the highest return on investment, and then you have to look at what we call the non-essential tasks that will not bring much. Like these are the tasks that can be done later, or maybe nobody's even going to really ask about them because you need to exert your good energy. So the thing is, on any given day, as I mentioned at some point in a different session, you have 4 blocks of energy. The first 2 blocks of energy, think about the Eisenhower. In fact, the Eisenhower box is the easiest way to describe this energy. So the first 2 boxes of energy are supposed to be where you put in the best work, the high focus work, the most complicated tasks. That is where you put them. When you handle those, your stress is less. Now, the last 2 boxes should be for non-essential tasks or the ones where you can delegate to somebody. Or again, so that you manage your energy. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of, is this a distraction or is this a return on investment? So when you're putting together your tasks, think about those. And then understand your circles of control. What does that mean? You need to learn what is within your control and what is not within your control. Many times the stresses that we go through are very much within our control. For example, you had a conflict with a colleague or your boss. That is very much within your control. How do you handle that? Usually it would be good to wait for the charged emotions to die down. And then after that, you can then approach your boss and say, I realize we did not end on a good note on this matter, and I would like us to be able to work together as a team. So is this a good time for us to have this discussion so that we can get it off our chest and be able to so when you do that, many people many times over are actually willing to sit down and solve that problem. Then, so again, identify what is your circle of control, what is not within your circle of control. Basically, ask yourself, is this a situation I can control or is this a situation I cannot control? 70% of the time, it's a situation you can control. Effective time management. Time management is what I like to call an endless conversation. It's in the area of the work that I do. However, you cannot manage time the same way as the other person. But the interesting thing about time, it doesn't matter whether you're big, small, rich, poor, whatever it is, all of us get the same 24 hours. What is the most important thing for you to do? You need to look at the things that you need to do vis-a-vis the amount of time that you have. In the office, you ideally have 8 hours to work. So instead of taking so much time on that YouTube video that you wanted to watch, going to the watering hole, read where the water is, to go and gossip. Use those 5 minutes to get the first 5% of a task done. So that by the time you're going home, you have done at least 70% of the tasks that needed to be done. Or even better, work with what are the 3 most important tasks that I need to complete today? We call them MITs. What are the 3 most important tasks that I need to complete today? Then I know this can give me a higher return on investment. And sometimes if you find yourself struggling with the most important task, look at the projects at hand, or even reach out to your boss and say, which one has a close deadline? Which one do you feel that if it's not handled right now, it will create problems for us in the future? And then identify inconsistencies and structural problems within your job. What does that mean? When you're given a job description, many times over, it's written at the bottom there and any other jobs assigned to you. But here is the truth. Your job description is never complete. There are so many layers of your job description that are not put in your document or in your main job description that you end up signing. So what you need to do about that is you need to look at your job and say, so this is my job description. These are the current things I'm doing. These are the things in between the layers that were not put there, and they are becoming a headache or a pain to me. How best can I improve the way I work? How best can I enrich my job so that it is more enjoyable? Because even when I move, I'll go to another organization, I will probably experience the same thing. So rather than run away, what can I do differently to enrich my job, manage those inconsistencies, and put a structure or a system that works for me? Then improve your relationship management. Relationship management goes hand in hand with communication. Think about how you communicate with people. There are those of us who communicate with others, and people tend to feel like we're very aggressive. Or we speak and we are overly sarcastic, and people tend to feel like, I don't think I want to speak to this person because the way their tone speaks, it feels like they don't appreciate or they're always being rude. So it's those little things that you need to look out for, because in the workplace, you will not survive without building proper relationships. Now, we're not saying that you go and build those relationships where you tell everybody all your secrets. The workplace needs to remain very professional, but you also need to be able to have cordial relationships where when you need help, a colleague will be very happy to help you. And then create a functional support system. No man is an island, and success is not a solo activity. So one of the things that you need to do is to identify your village. Remember the saying that says, it takes a village to raise a child. I like to extend that and say, it also takes a village for you to succeed. Nobody succeeded on their own. You had to have help at some point. So in the same way, you can't solve all your problems on your own. So enlist help from different people in your circles, not necessarily in the workplace. It could be friends that you went to school with. It could be your relatives, family, friends. Look for people who you know have your best interest at heart and put them as your support system, so that when you're going through a stressful situation, you can speak to them. As they always say, that a problem shared is half solved. And then get medical checkups on a regular basis. Why is this? Many of us generally go to the hospital to QSOA. Now you've gone to the pharmacy. We are so lucky. I don't know whether the word is lucky, but the fact that we can go into a pharmacy and say, I'm feeling like this, and you get medication without prescription. While I find it a very dangerous thing, it can also have its pluses. But now, because of that, we find that we're not getting the right treatment. Sometimes all we are doing is treating symptoms, and then those symptoms eventually become bigger problems in the office. You find that maybe it was a terminal illness. You find that it was actually very small, but because it took so long to go to hospital, now it cannot be reversed, and now you probably have to find yourself on medication throughout. These things affect you, because when you're not in good health, it's difficult to give your best. And then Know what the signs of fatigue and burnout look like so that you can arrest them. You can arrest them early, or you can actually take time to rest. Sometimes you say, don't quit. Okay, so instead of what is it called? Take time to rest rather than quitting. Because when you rest, your body and mind rejuvenate, and that thing which you found so difficult to do is suddenly so much easier for you to do. So start figuring out, like you can even work backwards and say, this time I actually felt like I was very stressed or I had a lot of burnout on me. What had initially happened? What was the trigger? So it's very important, because in order for you, just like when you're trying to ask for help, in order to be able to get the help, you have to be very clear on, this is the kind of help that I need. Then that person will be able to tell you, I am able to help you up to this point, or I'm sorry, I don't think I'm the person to assist you in this particular matter. Okay, and then understand what your job entails. Have a very good understanding, and again, know what is within your control and what is outside of your control. Identify areas of mismatch and how you can improve them. Again, job enrichment. Evaluate your job and list the things that give the real meaning to your job, and then those that do not. Then weigh the options. If, for example, the things that do not give meaning to your job outweigh the good ones, you can then make a decision. Do I still want to stay in this job, or do I then need to work out an exit strategy? Then avoid desperation at work. Desperation at work is the one that makes you start looking for validation. You want to be liked by everybody, so you take on other people's assignments. And I want to introduce an interesting term called weaponized incompetency. So weaponized incompetency is when you work, when you have a colleague who is supposed to do their job, but for whatever reason, they believe that you can do the job better, not because they can't do it, but they don't want to put in the effort, the energy, and the work. So they either do the work badly, they sabotage, and now that work has to be assigned to you, or you actually have to take on that assignment in order to do it well. So they end up escaping their responsibilities because maybe the boss has seen this person can't get this job done. So you also need to look out for people like that. And unfortunately, these are the same people who are very quick to run and steal your credit. So again, avoid desperation, learn to be patient. Okay? Like take time to see what is happening, take time to understand people's line of thinking. Your opinions are not the only ones that count. Because if you're not patient, here's the interesting thing, you will end up being the patient in the hospital because of the amount of stress that you're carrying. Then seek out mentors. Seek out mentors who can help you, who can support you. And most of them have usually gone through some of these problems, and they can help you improve on your emotional intelligence in order for you to handle those things better. Be diligent and learn how to give your best all the time. There are those people who say, well, this job doesn't pay me enough. Yeah, this job doesn't pay me enough to give my best. I just do enough. So here's a problem with, I just do enough to get by or to get my paycheck. You will not always be on that job. You will move to the next job. And the determinant for you to move to the next job is actually determined by the amount of effort you put in the current job and the amount of learning you're willing to do. Like, go through that task. It's difficult. Keep at it until you figure out what to do. Then if you are a supervisor, become intentional about listening to your employees and your team. And also learn to honor what your team says, either by upholding the confidentiality, one. Secondly, by, if an employee says, boss, I think we can improve here and here, if you know it is doable, follow through. If you know it is not doable, please don't take employees in circles. Just tell them in a most professional way, this is not doable. I have done the best I can, but up to this point, either management is not supporting this because of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then I'm actually just about done. Organize your work. Organize your work. When I was in campus, we would walk into the lecturers' offices either to submit our projects and all. And sometimes you could barely see the lecturer. Why? Because it's a whole pile of books. So you're basically trying to look for them, like you almost want to do like this to look for them there. So the problem with that is that it creates clutter. When you don't have a clear desk or a clear workstation, it becomes difficult for you to focus because you keep seeing a lot of other things and you get very distracted. Eventually, it becomes a stressor. So the best thing you can do is have only the things that you need for the first 2 tasks on your desk. Then the rest, put them in a place that you can reach. Another way to organize your work is identifying what tasks do I need to do in the next 1 or 2 hours. Do I have all the resources that I need? What are resources in this case? Resources is time. Resources is your pen, your paper, your research, the book, maybe other books for research that you need. Whatever that you need to be able to get that job done is regarded as a resource. So when you have it, you actually avoid something called wasted motion. So imagine you are going to the kitchen, you wanted to refill your water bottle, you wanted to get a sandwich, and you also wanted to get coffee. So you can actually find a way to get all those 3 at the same time. But then what happens sometimes, you go, you get your water, you sit. After 2 minutes, you remember, oh, I forgot my coffee. Then you go back. Then you remember, oh, I forgot my sandwich. So you've basically done 3 trips for something that you could have done 1 trip. So you've ended up wasting a lot of time. And what that also does, it messes up with your focus and concentration. You easily become distracted, and the things that needed to get done won't get done. Eventually, now it becomes very stressful. And suddenly you're saying, oh, my day is so wasted. Then other little things you can do: listen to music, go for a brisk walk, deal with anger management issues. There are those of us, somebody says just one statement, and then World War III begins. Because somebody said something, it was a trigger because maybe you did not handle another issue. So identify. If someone tells you you have anger management issues, someone might be overreacting or not. They may actually be coming from a place where they say, you know what, I've noticed this, and this is the reason that I am saying. I have observed that you probably have anger management issues. And it could be from an office perspective or even outside. Whatever it is, find a way to deal with it. And if you can't deal with it on your own, seek help, seek professional help, seek help from somebody maybe who has been there. Then develop a positive attitude, positive vibes. We talk about that. What does developing a positive attitude mean? When things are not going right at work, it's very easy to say nothing is working. But instead of saying that, a positive attitude means, okay, this is not working. How else can I work this around so that it works to my advantage? Think about it that way. Then that is about it. So I think over to you, Jay. So perhaps for the Q&A session, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you so much, Helen, for that insightful session. And I can see that people have really understood this topic and they are so keen on, they don't have questions. I think we should be the ones now asking them questions. Anyone with a question there? Regina, are you there today? We have Regina. Regina is not in today. Anyone with a question on workplace stress management? Alice says that she has learned so much. Thank you so much,
Alice. There's a question here.
Yeah.
How do you deal with a boss who is this is Calvin Odongo. How do you deal with a boss who is all-knowing? Any challenge is taken as insubordination. For instance, you may know how something is done, but the boss wants you to do it the way he or she knows. So this is a very interesting question. Thank you for asking this question. So there are very many ways to look at this. So one of the biggest challenges we have in the workplace, people do not want to admit when they don't know how to do something. It can also create a sense of insecurity that because you know and they don't know, you might be out to take their jobs. And this is where boss management comes in. So you have to find a very friendly approach. For example, you can approach it this way. By the boss, I remember we were discussing this project. I have been doing some research on it, and I actually found some very interesting ways of doing it. Can I just share with you and show you how it is done? Now, if you keep trying to approach this in a polite and professional way, and your boss is not receptive, one of the things that you can do, and you're not really trying to be, how do I put it? You're not trying to make them look bad, but something has got to give. And especially when your work is not, when things are not working out on your side because of this, because now this possibly becomes a barrier to your success. So you can now start to document. Okay. For example, you can write an email and say, follow up to this, this, and this, and this. And you can actually even, CC the top, the boss that your boss reports to. But please note, this is when it's extreme, nothing has worked out. Another way around it is to look for a peer of your boss who they get along. Have a conversation and tell them, look, I really appreciate working with my boss, but I've been trying to share these new ideas because I think they actually work. I'm even happy to share the ideas as long as confidentiality is not an issue. Are you able to reach out to him or her and just help them understand that I just want both of us to succeed because we're on the same team? So I hope that helps. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much for that answer. We have Sarah who is asking, how do you deal with the micromanagement at work?
So here's an interesting thing again. Micromanagement often comes from a place where this person maybe has not been taught the leadership, they've not been taught the right leadership and people skills, but they also the background. You'd be surprised that most people, when they are working, the working, how they deliver, how they think is based on their upbringing. So if you are in a place where all the time you had somebody under your nose checking what you're doing, it's probably what they think is the best way of doing things. So what you now would do is to find a different way to manage that person. To manage that person. For example, when you have a project, what you can do is you divide that project. So maybe the project is supposed to be done within a span of maybe 30 days, and you tell the boss, so I have looked at this project, and based on how we have discussed, everybody has been assigned their work. So here is how I propose we go about this. So I have divided my part of the assignment into 10 parts. So this first part, I will report to you in the next 3 days so say today is the 6th of March. So Monday is the 10th. So I will give you a report, an update by the 10th. And then what you do now is you keep documenting that. So what you're basically doing is you're telling your boss, stop micromanaging me without actually using the direct words. Because you see, the moment someone can see you're competent or you know what you're doing, then they have no business being around you. Another way is if they are always around you, then you can also approach them from a place of inquisitive or curiosity and ask them, okay, so maybe would you want to tell me what your concerns are with regard to this? And somebody who is genuine about what they are doing, they will actually tell you, actually my concern was that maybe you didn't understand this part. Then you can go ahead and tell that boss, can I walk you through what I understood when you explained this project? And then if I have missed something, then you can then interject and let me know what I have missed, and then we can correct. So there are so many ways to deal even with the most difficult people. The most important thing, in fact, I forgot to mention that earlier, when you're in the organization with conflict, you're being micromanaged and all, there are two things. There is reacting and responding. Teach yourself how to respond, not react. React is, think about a chemical reaction. Every time someone says something, it's a trigger. But responding means you take a moment of silence, you think through the process, and then now you respond very calmly. The beauty about responding calmly, you actually disarm the other person who thought that you were going to be all up in arms fighting. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much for that. We have another question here from Dan, who is asking, how do we make good use of stress and pressure positively for career growth and development?
Very, very good question. So think about this. When you're doing, whenever you're doing a good job, there's an amount of effort that you have to put. That effort on many levels is a kind of pressure. So in order for you to say you want to use stress and pressure positively, this is about stretching yourself, going the extra mile. I'll give you an example with something I like to do. I really love to read books because I believe they're very informative, and information is power, intellectual knowledge that nobody can take away from you. So how I look at it is, if, for example, this year I read 50 books, I am going to stretch myself and read an extra 20 books, so that if I read last year 50 books, this year I'm going to read 70 books. What does that mean? It means I have to create time to read those extra 20 books. That's some kind of pressure, because then I have to move a few things around to create that time in order for me to complete those books. The other thing about using stress and pressure positively is to look at the bigger picture. If I decide to go out of my usual routine or my usual things that I do, what is the bigger picture? What am I going to achieve from this? And I can tell you, and I know even Jay is a witness, when you put in the right work, good things come your way. Good things come your way. People notice you without you even shouting your name, shouting your name or shouting your work. Your work begins to speak for itself. So start saying, going forward, I'm going to stretch myself, and don't think about it as stress. Because you see also, and if you think about it as stress, then give it a definition that will drive you in a positive direction. Because when people say, oh, I'm feeling so stressed, the first thing that everybody thinks about is stress as a negative thing. So I hope that helps. Oh, and hold on. Oh, yes, for the career part of things, look at where you are right now and say, how had you planned in the next 5 years? Say, I had planned to be maybe a manager in 5 years. You know what? I'm going to change that script. I'm going to be a manager in 3 years. So the things I had spread out to do in 5 years, I'm going to spread them out, or rather compress them to do them in 3 years. That means you have to put in extra work for that. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much for that response. We have Mary Michael, who is asking, how do you deal with the senior manager who doesn't cooperate with the team in work plan and rely on blame games to his colleagues in the same department?
So the best way to manage people who like to play the blame game is to document. The beauty about documenting, no one will doubt, document things in real time. Document things in real time and copy everybody that is concerned. For example, one of the best ways, you can have a bad manager, but a very good team to work with. So as a team, you put in the effort and say, guys, we're going to make sure we look good. Because when we look good, fine, our manager will look good, and maybe there will be less drama. So be sure to say, this work needs to be done by this one, by this one, by this one. And it is very easy to manage your boss without them even knowing that you're managing them. Like now, as I had said earlier, list down if for example, there's a project you're doing, list down who does what is expected. If it's a major project, actually do the full assessment thing. What are the kind of resources we need? What are the kind of challenges? And do a proper report. And then get your manager involved every step of the way. If your manager doesn't show up when you people are doing the job, keep your manager informed, keep them on copy so that they don't ever get to say that you did anything behind their backs. Now, when the manager makes it difficult for you as a team to do your job, I know this varies from one organization to the other. There's something we call employee assistance programs, and sometimes we have what are they called, toll-free lines where you can actually launch a complaint. If it needs to be that, then go that way. And the beauty about those programs, or rather the toll-free line, everything is handled in a very confidential matter. Obviously, at some point, the manager will sense it was my team member. They may not know exactly who it was. Then, again, as I said, document, and keep your boss posted every step of the way. Like if you write to your colleague something that your boss needed to know, copy your boss there so they don't end up saying anything. Now, if they end up trying to blame somebody, you can then bring up these emails or these documents and say, looking at this, I can see so-and-so was supposed to do this, so-and-so was supposed to do this. Can we review or revisit this so that we know what has gone wrong and how we can then best correct it? Over to you, Jay.
Thank you. As we finalize, we have 3 more questions here. Do you have positive stress If yes, are there any examples?
Yes, positive stress. I think I'm going to connect with what somebody had asked about career development. Positive stress, I would say, is where you stretch yourself. You stretch yourself where you stretch yourself out of the usual because you know you will get something good. So because we're talking about employment, workplace, and all, I will give an example or I'll give again an example of your career. So you found yourself in the assistant manager position and you want to be in a different position. Or at the moment, maybe you're earning 60,000 shillings. And the other day, you saw a job that was advertised that was paying 150,000 Kenya shillings. But now you're looking and you're saying, hey, all these things they're asking, I don't have. But because of the amount you have seen there, you actually find yourself saying, I'm going to put in the work that I need to in order to earn this. And I will give myself a year, I'll give myself 6 months. And you see, the pressure is dependent on there's something that can take 10 years because you choose to take 10 years. And there's something that was supposed to take 10 years. It took 1 year because you decided to compress and put in the work. You decided to make sacrifices. I'm sure you've seen on the social media where a lot of people have, there's this little post that says, disappear for 6 months and then come back. What does that mean? Disappearing for 6 months is you sacrificing maybe you're sacrificing those outings, vacations, and all to do something different so that after 6 months, you're saying, well, the 150,000 I was even aiming at now, I have actually gotten to my 300,000. So I think that's the best way I can define positive stress because you know at the end of the day, you're putting pressure on yourself, but for a good thing and for what it costs. Okay, Jay? All right. How do you deal with a
Sorry,
boss
how
who
do you deal with
is
the boss
poor in communication?
and also giving feedback?
Okay, go on, Jay. Go on, Jay.
How do you deal with a boss who is poor in communication and also giving feedback?
Again, boss management. It's very easy to manage people even when you're not in a position of leadership or supervision. So what you do is there are bosses who like to communicate on WhatsApp. And by the way, people, it's important to note there was some kind of research we were doing the other day, and we ended up looking at court cases. And in all those court cases, or rather the majority of them, it was indicated that communication on WhatsApp to employees, especially when sending things like letters and all, those are not regarded as official. So if you're doing that, an employee can easily deny they got your message, that they got your message, and it becomes a big problem. So first and foremost, it's important to know what official communication is there. There's a boss who will give you instructions and come back later and say, "Me, I told you that." No, I didn't. So the best way to nab that kind of a situation in terms of communication, because that's a form of poor communication in one way or the other, is you had the discussion. Go back to your desk and write an email. Dear Jay, I'm following up on the earlier conversation we had. These were the instructions that you gave me. 1, I do ABCD. 2, I do BCD. 3, I do EFG. Please confirm that I got everything correct. What you're doing, whether they respond or they don't, you're committing them to what they asked you to do. Like you're committing them to acknowledge that they actually asked you to do 1 to 3 things. Now, on the feedback part of things, you can actually engage them by taking initiative yourself, where you say, you can again write to them and say, we were doing this project and I'm not sure and I realized that I have not received any feedback. Would you be willing to give me feedback? Can I plan a meeting? And sometimes, you know what you can do? There's some of us who actually have access to our bosses' calendars. And you can say, looking at these 3 days, I know that you have a time slot at this point. Can I book a 30 minutes time slot so that we can discuss my feedback on this and this? So you see, you're now committing them to saying, yes, they might actually say, I don't have time. Then recommit them at that point and say, please look at your calendar and let's be able to firm this up because I believe this is in the best interest. I would like to be able to improve how I do my work. Okay, over to you, Jay.
Yes, on the last question, communication has always been my biggest challenge. I know I pass my points clearly, but my peers in the same department say my points are not clear. I often get confused, which eventually lead to disagreements due to unmet deadlines and incomplete tasks. How can I deal with this? Thank you so much, Miriam, for admitting and realizing that you have that weakness. Over to you, Helen.
All right, thank you. Very good question. So there are different ways to look at this, but how I see it is, remember that we think differently, and still, and then we end up providing the results. Think about the way we say there are many ways to kill a rat, but at the end of the day, what we are looking for, it needs to be dead. The same way you can communicate something because of the way your mind thinks. Let me give you an interesting example, and I didn't know this until sometime last week. So if I was calculating 1,200 times 200, so what I do, I take the 1,000 and I multiply it by, I multiply it by, just a moment, I tell you how I do this. So I go with the 1,200 and then I remove all the zeros. Okay, so I remove all the zeros and then I just put now these other figures and I say 12 times 2 is 24. So at the end of the day, I know this is 2,400. So you see, I have separated my zeros. Another person will simply calculate everything with all, factoring in everything. What am I trying to say? We've ended up with the same answer, but we used a different formula to do the calculation. So in order for you to be able to communicate, if your colleagues are saying the way you pass your points across, that you're not communicating, one of the ways you can ask them is, how best can I communicate with you in order for you to understand what I'm trying to say? Alternatively is to ask them, which part did you not understand? Have you ever been in a room when you ask people, how many cannot hear me? And everybody puts up their hands, and then you ask them, but you responded. So why would they then say they did not hear? So what you need to do is to, ask that question, but also look at when you're communicating, are you using too many words to say something? Yeah. And this is then also where I would encourage you to go to Google and YouTube, by the way, people are very useful. Sometimes we tend to think that the only way we can learn is going to a classroom. YouTube is free. Go to YouTube and look at the different channels providing something that you require. So in this case, Miriam, I would encourage you, go to YouTube and look at videos on business communication. Okay? Why I say that is it might help you see where maybe you're not communicating clearly. You could ask your colleagues and they don't respond. Why? Because there are people who feel when they tell you the truth, you might not take it the right way, or you might take it like they are against you, or it becomes personal. So people start saying, no, I don't know, like when you were saying that point, yeah, like they're really just going round and round in circles, but they're not really saying what it is. So that's what it should be. Then the other thing is to also ask them if they did not understand, and especially maybe if this comes after, how do I put it, after maybe a discussion. Again, remember what I said, write down to those your team, say, guys, this was the discussion in the meeting. Please confirm I got all the points correctly. Because you see now, when you're talking about leading to disagreements and unmet deadlines, incomplete tasks, that can create a performance stroke disciplinary problem for you. Also ask yourself, so this is not to you, Miriam, this is to everybody in the room. One of the biggest challenges we have discovered along the way as coaches and also even as a productivity coach, a lot of us have undiagnosed ADHD. So because sometimes we are struggling with that ADHD, dyslexia, and all those things, you find that you can do your job, but at a certain speed, or when someone gives you too many instructions, you have a challenge picking that up. Why am I saying that? Sometimes you're just asking, but I was in that meeting. I understood everything. So how come things are not working right now? Try and figure out, which is why I said earlier, If you feel that something is not working and then too many people are raising concerns in the office, it might be good for you to also see a specialist if you feel I've done everything I can, but I don't think I'm getting the right support. So I hope that helps to answer. And of course, again, on a personal level, see what you can do. And sometimes reach out to people who are in your close circles and tell them, so I was given this case scenario in the office. This is how I explained it. Could you tell me what was wrong with how I explained it? That will actually help you to start to see things from a different perspective. Thank you. Over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much, Helen. Maybe now the last one, maybe in 1 minute, dealing with a boss who's always complaining of gaps every day, and you handle almost everything, including the things that are his to handle. Congo, I don't get your question. You done with the question, or you can maybe unmute yourself and ask your question. It seems incomplete.
Okay, I think what he means is how do you deal with a boss who is always complaining of gaps every day and you handle almost everything, including things that are his to handle. I think there's something I missed, or maybe I said in a slightly different way. There's something called boundaries, okay? And the reason I mentioned boundaries is because of this part where you said you handle almost everything that are his to handle. So first and foremost, again, in the organization, documenting things on email, on paper is very, very important. So when the boss is always complaining of gaps, can you ask your boss to be very, very specific? For example, you can actually approach your boss in the office and say, I note that you have raised concerns with regard to gaps. Could you be more specific about the gaps that are there so that I can also be more intentional, or I can focus on those gaps and close them? You might actually find that it is just someone who doesn't want to say that you're doing a good job because they want to see you keep doing it. Now, the fastest way to know that, and I'm not asking you to wait until then, if you had to move from that job, that if that boss is incompetent, that is how the incompetence will get seen very, very fast. Somebody once told me, just because you're working with an incompetent boss or incompetent colleague, don't assume that the top management doesn't see. They see, and when the right time comes, they will strike. So that said, ask them to be very, very specific. Now, on the part of the jobs that need to be done, you can actually be able to say no without saying no. For example, if you had to do 10 assignments, 5 of those are your assignments and the other 5 belong to that boss, then you can actually say, I'm looking at the assignments listed here, and I note the first 5 are within my docket, but the other 5 are within your docket. Kindly note due to the maybe the workload or the nature of the amount of time I have to put into this task, I will not be able to work on the tasks that are under your docket. However, we can discuss this further if you wish. So you're not telling them, I'm not going to do your work, but you're simply telling them, I'm going to do what is within my capacity. Because again, sometimes we stretch ourselves so much because we are scared the boss is going to prevent us from getting a bonus. They're going to give us a bad report. And please know, you actually have the power to say enough is enough. What does that mean? You're not going to walk into your boss's office and say, but then you're not going to be stressing me the way you want. No, you're not going to say that. You can actually work out a strategy where you say, this is what I'm getting from this job. Do I want to continue working here? And also know that there's a possibility for you to be able to even move laterally. What does that mean? Like you could move to another department. Such possibilities are there. Sometimes the easiest way is an exit strategy, but ask yourself, if you move, is this problem going to follow me, or is this problem only within this organization? Don't create what we call learned helplessness, where you say like, now, sasa nifanye nini? What do I do? You know, I have to do the job. I have to pay my bills. I have to. No, you actually are empowered to do something about it. Don't let anybody step on you because either they're in a position of power, they put you under so much stress such that even when you're a good performer, it becomes difficult for us to see your performance because of the amount of work that has been put on your plate. Over to you, Jay.
We come to the end of our session tonight. That was very insightful, Helen, and we look forward to engaging you even more so that you can continue with this conversation. This is a conversation that is affecting most of us on our day-to-day operations in our respective organizations that you work in. And it's good that we can get insight on how we can be able to manage such scenarios. Most people I know, they face this day in, day out, but they are not able to talk about it because a good number of us just tolerate the stress at their workplaces so that they can be able to put food on their table. And we hope that through this we can be able to learn how to manage it better, and moving forward we can always get better and better. I would like to ask a volunteer to close for us with a word of prayer.